The soldier returned home from a 7-year deployment to find his family had already said their final goodbyes. The hiss of the bus's air brakes was a sound of finality. It was the last mechanical sigh separating Staff Sergeant Leo Vance from the life he had held in his mind's eye for 2,555 days. He stepped down onto the damp, cracked asphalt of the bus station, and the air that filled his lungs was cool and thick with the smell of rain-soaked earth and distant exhaust fumes. It was the scent of home, a world away from the baked clay and cordite perfume of Kandahar. He swung the heavy duffel bag from the cargo hold onto his shoulder. The weight was familiar, a ghost of the 70-pound ruck he'd carried across a landscape of rock and fear. But this bag was different. It didn't carry ammunition or rations or trauma kits. It carried gifts. A hand-carved wooden horse for his daughter, Maya. A silk scarf for his wife, Sarah. It carried the entire, crushing weight of 7 years of hope. The plan was simple, a mission he'd rehearsed in the quiet moments before sleep, in the deafening belly of a Chinook, in the stark silence of a watchtower. He wouldn't call. He'd just appear. A ghost in fatigues walking up his own driveway. He'd imagined the look on Sarah's face, the initial shock melting into tears. He'd imagined Maya, who was only 4 when he left, now a girl of 11, maybe not even recognizing him at first, then running into his arms. The thought had been a shield against loneliness and a balm for the wounds you couldn't see. He chose to walk. A taxi felt too sterile, too rushed. He needed to reacquaint himself with the terrain, to feel the solid, unbroken pavement under his boots. The town hadn't changed, not really. The same old oak trees lined Elm Street, their branches forming a peaceful canopy over the road. Mr. Henderson's prize-winning roses still climbed the white picket fence on the corner, their blooms heavy and drooping from the afternoon shower. It was all exactly as he'd stored it in his memory, a perfect diorama of the world he was fighting for. Every house was a landmark. The Millers, where he'd broken a window playing baseball at 12. The Chens, with the basketball hoop where he'd taught Sarah how to shoot a clumsy free throw. Each one was a waypoint on the map leading back to his objective. His heart hammered a steady, anxious rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation. He turned the final corner onto his street, Maple Drive. And that's when the first anomaly registered. A dissonant note in the symphony of his homecoming. Stabbed into the center of his front lawn, stark and clinical, was a wooden post with a red and white sign. For sale. Leo stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk. His brain, trained to identify threats and inconsistencies, flagged it immediately. Threat. Wrong. He scanned the property with an intensity he usually reserved for spotting IEDs. The grass was too long, speckled with dandelions. The swing set he'd built for Maya, the one with the 2 red seats, was gone. Nothing remained but 2 dark, square patches in the lawn where its legs had once stood, like shallow graves. The house itself looked asleep. The windows were dark, lifeless. No lights on, even with the gray overcast sky. A cold knot formed in his stomach, dense and heavy. This wasn't part of the mission briefing. This wasn't in the plan. He walked up the driveway, his boots suddenly feeling clumsy and loud on the concrete. The welcome mat, faded and curled at the edges, was still there. Welcome to our home, the words were a bitter irony. He pulled the house key from the small pocket of his jeans, the one he'd carried on his dog tag chain for 7 years. He slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. He tried again, jiggling it, pushing. Nothing. The lock had been changed. He pressed his face to the side window, cupping his hands to block the glare. The living room was empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of life. The furniture was gone. All of it. The comfortable, worn sofa where he and Sarah had watched movies. The rocking chair where he'd read Maya bedtime stories. The shelves that had held their books and photos. Gone. Dust motes danced in the slivers of gray light slanting through the blinds. A deep, profound stillness hung in the air, the kind of silence that follows a catastrophe. His home, his sanctuary, was a hollowed-out shell. The weight of the duffel bag on his shoulder was no longer about hope. It was a physical manifestation of his sudden, crushing loss. The wooden horse and the silk scarf felt like relics from another man's life. A curtain twitched in the house next door. He saw a flicker of movement, then the familiar, stooped silhouette of Mrs. Gable, their elderly neighbor. He remembered her as a woman who smelled of cinnamon and always had a cookie for Maya. She was watching him. Leo let his hand fall from the doorknob. His training took over, suppressing the panic, locking it away in a steel box in his chest. Gather intel. Assess the situation. He turned and walked across the damp lawn that separated their properties, his mind racing through possibilities. A financial problem. Did they have to sell? Did they move to a smaller place? Where were they? Why wouldn't Sarah have told him? Mrs. Gable opened her front door before he reached the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face, a roadmap of 80 years of life, was etched with a mixture of shock and a deep, sorrowful pity. "Leo," she whispered, her voice thin and frail. "My God. It is you." "Mrs. Gable," he said, his own voice sounding foreign, rusty. "It's me." "I'm home." He tried to smile, but his facial muscles wouldn't cooperate. "Looks like I missed the moving vans." Did they leave a forwarding address?" The old woman's eyes filled with tears. She didn't answer right away. She just stared at him, at his uniform, at the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The look in her eyes was one of profound, world-shattering sadness. It was the look a chaplain gives you before delivering the worst news of your life. "Oh, you poor boy," she finally said, her voice cracking. She reached out a trembling hand and laid it on his forearm. Her touch was bird-like, fragile. "We all thought you were dead." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Dead. The air rushed from his lungs, and for a second, the world tilted on its axis. He felt his knees weaken. He'd been listed as MIA for 11 months after his unit was ambushed, before he and 2 other survivors were rescued from a remote mountain village. But the letters he'd sent after, the calls from the base in Germany. What was all he could manage? "The men in uniform," she explained, her gaze distant, remembering. "They came to the door. 2 of them. Almost 5 years ago now. They told Sarah you were missing. Then, a year later, they came back. They said you were gone, Leo. Declared, killed in action." The steel box in his chest burst open. Panic, grief, and a white-hot rage flooded him. 5 years. They thought he was dead for 5 years. He'd spent the last 3 years in a forward operating base, thinking his letters were arriving, that his family knew he was alive and just waiting for his tour to end. The military bureaucracy, a labyrinth of paperwork and crossed signals, had failed in the most catastrophic way imaginable. It had erased him. "Where is she, Mrs. Gable?" he demanded, his voice raw with desperation. "Sarah. Maya. Where are they? I need to see them." Mrs. Gable's face crumpled completely. A sob escaped her lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. "Oh, Leo," she shook her head slowly, tears tracking paths through the soft wrinkles on her cheeks. "You don't know." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of terrible fact. She took a shaky breath, steadying herself. Her role had shifted from neighbor to harbinger. Sarah, she was never the same after they told her. It was like the light just went out inside her. She held on for Maya, of course. She was so brave for that little girl. But the sadness, it was a sickness, Leo. It got into her bones. Leo stood frozen, the neatly trimmed lawn of his neighbor's yard feeling like the edge of a cliff. He was listening to a story about a woman he knew, but it felt like a stranger. The Sarah he remembered was vibrant, resilient, the bedrock of his life. "She got sick," Mrs. Gable continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The doctor said it was pneumonia, but we all knew. She'd lost the will. She fought, for a while. But her heart was broken. It just couldn't keep beating." The world went silent. The chirping of birds, the distant hum of traffic, it all faded into a dull roar in his ears. Sick. Her heart was broken. He saw Sarah's face in his mind, her wide, laughing eyes. "She passed away, Leo. 2 years ago this spring." The duffel bag slipped from his shoulder and landed on the wet grass with a soft, heavy thud. The wooden horse. The silk scarf. Tokens for a ghost. He felt nothing. A vast, hollow emptiness where his heart should be. He was a soldier trained for pain, for loss. He'd seen friends fall. He knew what grief was. But this was different. This was the amputation of his soul. But then, a single, desperate thought pierced through the fog. Maya. Maya, he choked out the name. My daughter. Where is she? Who is she with? Sarah's sister. He looked at Mrs. Gable, his eyes pleading for a piece of good news, a single thread of hope to cling to in this wreckage. Her expression was the answer he never wanted. It was an abyss of sorrow. After Sarah was gone, she said, her voice thick with emotion, Maya went to live with her aunt in Oregon. She was a quiet little thing, always looking at the sky, as if she was waiting for you both to come back. About 6 months after her mother, there was an accident. Leo closed his eyes. He didn't want to hear it. He wanted her to stop talking. He wanted to rewind time, to get off the bus and get right back on, to return to the desert where life was simple. You fight, you survive, you come home. He'd completed the mission. He'd survived. But he'd failed to understand the terms of victory. A car, Mrs. Gable whispered, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. It was foggy on the coastal highway. They said it was instant. She didn't suffer. He didn't make a sound. There was no sound to make. The grief was too large, too absolute. It was a physical presence, pressing in on him, stealing the air from his lungs, crushing his bones. His mission was over. His objective was gone. He was a soldier standing on a battlefield after the war had ended, holding a weapon with no one left to protect. He didn't remember thanking her. He didn't remember walking away. His body moved on autopilot. He found himself back at his own house, this hollow monument to a life that was his and yet no longer existed. He went to the back of the house, to the cellar door. The old lock was still there, rusted but functional. He gave it a sharp, calculated kick, splintering the frame. The sound echoed in the silence. Breaking and entering into his own history. The house smelled of dust and memory. He walked through the barren rooms, his boots echoing on the hardwood floors. He saw ghosts in every corner. Sarah laughing on the floor with a baby Maya. Maya's 5th birthday party, cake smeared on the wall. He ran his hand along a doorframe in what used to be the kitchen. Faint pencil marks were still visible. A height chart. Maya, age 4. Maya, age 5. It stopped there. Her growth, frozen in time right before he'd left. He sank to the floor in the middle of the empty living room, his back against a wall. The soldier in him, the man who had faced down death and never flinched, was gone. In his place was just a man. A husband with no wife. A father with no child. He pulled his knees to his chest and finally, in the lonely, dusty silence of the home he fought to return to, he wept. It was a raw, silent agony, tears carving clean paths through the grime on his face. He cried for the woman whose heart he had inadvertently broken. He cried for the little girl he would never see grow up. He cried for the men who had spent 7 years dreaming of a homecoming that would never come. His life, the one he'd held onto like a prayer, was a ghost story. And he was the one left to haunt it. Hours passed. The gray light outside faded to black. He didn't move. He was adrift in an ocean of grief, with no shore in sight. The choice before him was stark. He could let this ocean pull him under, succumb to the darkness that had claimed his wife. Or he could find a new mission. There was one last thing to do. One final act of duty. He found Mrs. Gable's number written on a faded notepad by the dead telephone jack. He called her from his burner cell, his voice a hoarse rasp. He didn't ask how she was. He just asked one question. Where? She understood immediately. Oak Hill Cemetery, she said softly. Just past the old church on the west side of town. They're together. He found them under a large maple tree, its leaves just beginning to turn the fiery colors of autumn. The stone was simple, elegant granite. Polished and clean. Someone had been taking care of it. Mrs. Gable, probably. Sarah Vance. Beloved wife and mother. Her light was too bright for this world. And right below it, etched into the same stone, a testament to a love that transcended life itself. Maya Vance. Beloved daughter. Now she flies with the angels. Leo traced their names with his fingertips. The stone was cold, solid, real. It was the final, irrefutable proof. His war was over. His family was gone. He knelt on the damp grass, the cool earth soaking through the knee of his trousers. He didn't have grand words or prayers. His grief was too primal for that. He reached into his duffel bag, past the useless gifts, and pulled out 2 small, smooth stones he'd picked up from a riverbed in the Pesh Valley. It was a tradition he'd seen the locals practice. Leaving a stone to show you had visited, that you remembered. It was all he had left to give. He placed 1 stone on top of the grave marker for Sarah, and 1 for Maya. He looked at their names, at the dates that bracketed their short lives. And in that moment, the anger he'd felt, at the army, at the world, even at Sarah for giving up, it all dissolved. It was replaced by a wave of profound, heartbreaking understanding. She hadn't given up. She had endured an agony he could only imagine, for as long as she could. She had fought her own war, on her own home front. And she had lost. He had been fighting to get back to them, but they had been fighting just to survive his absence. His homecoming wasn't the end of their story. It was an epilogue he was never meant to read. He stayed there until the moon was high in the sky, a silent sentinel at the grave of his life. He didn't cry anymore. He just was. A man hollowed out, but not broken. Not completely. Months later, the for sale sign was gone. Leo had bought the house back. It took nearly all of his back pay and savings, but he couldn't let it go. It was his. Theirs. He spent his days working, slowly, methodically. Sanding floors, patching walls, painting. Restoring the shell. He attended a weekly meeting in the basement of the very church he'd passed on his way to the cemetery. It was a support group for veterans. For the first few weeks, he just sat and listened, nursing a cup of stale coffee. Then one night, he spoke. He told them about Sarah and Maya. He told them about the house, and the ghosts, and the heavy weight of a homecoming that came too late. He talked, and for the first time in 7 years, he felt like someone was actually listening. One crisp Saturday afternoon, he was in the backyard. The air smelled of freshly cut lumber and autumn leaves. He was building a new swing set. Not the same as the old one, but similar. 2 red seats, hanging from a sturdy wooden frame. It was a memorial. A monument to a love that still anchored him to the world. He finished sanding a piece of wood smooth and looked up at the house. The windows were clean now, and from this angle, he could see the light on in the kitchen. It was no longer a tomb. It was a sanctuary. His sanctuary. He knew the ghosts would always be there. He didn't want them to leave. They were a part of him now. His war was over, but a new mission had begun. Not a mission of fighting enemies or taking ground, but one of quiet endurance. A mission to honor the memory of the family he had lost by fighting for the peace of the men who had survived. 1 day, 1 hour, 1 breath at a time. He had come home. And now, he had to learn how to live there.